Hello to everyone and welcome to today's conversation with Amy Tan. My name is Priya David Clemens and I'm the host of KQED Newsroom, which typically airs on Friday nights here on PBS. And you're joining us for a conversation with the writer, artist, and sage Amy Tan. Let me tell you a little bit about Amy. Welcome, first of all, Amy, of course.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here.
So Amy was born to Chinese immigrants who came to America, and she grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, as we were just discussing, going to many different schools. When she was 15, unfortunately, both her brother and her father passed away from brain tumors. Her first book, The Joylet Club, was hailed as an amazing novel when it first appeared and was a surprise bestseller. It stayed on the New York Times bestseller list for over 40 weeks. And she has also written many, many other books, including The Kitchen God's Wife, The 100 Secret Senses, The Bone Setter's Daughter, Saving Fish from Drowning, and The Valley of Amazement. All of these have also been New York Times bestsellers. And today we are talking about a new film. It's part of the PBS American Masters biography series, and it's based on Amy Tan's life and on her recent book called Unintended Memoirs. And let's start, Amy, we're going to start talking about that book, but first I want to introduce our other guest today, Kyle Redford. Kyle is the wife of the director who made this film. His name is James Redford, and unfortunately, James passed away in October, but Kyle's here to share with us about the experience of making this film and the beautiful friendship that came between James and Amy. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you.
So Amy, let's begin with a discussion of the book. It's the book on which this new documentary is based. Could you tell us, for those of you who haven't had a chance to read it yet, why did you write this book and what's it about?
The book is actually called Where the Past Begins. And I talked about it as an unintended memoir because I had intended to write a book about writing, about language, about imagery and things like that. But I ended up finding that everything that I do with writing is related to my past. So I had to explain what this comes from. And as a result, people thought that I was writing memoir. I resisted for a while. I kept saying, no, it's about writing, but it is a lot about my life and areas that I had not looked into. So it was, talking to Jamie was the first time I was saying it out loud, talking about, what went into the writing of that book.
Yeah. And Kyle, I understand both Amy and your husband share a love of music, which they express through being in rock bands, not what you'd expect. Tell us a little bit about your husband and his interest in making this particular film and how that experience was for him.
Yes, well, he met Amy actually doing research for another film that he was making and has finished about the value of play. And we both have mutual friends with Amy, and he knew about her, and we had met her before, but we knew about her band, and Jamie thought that would be an interesting part of the play documentary, exploring Amy's relationship to her play and her music. And so they had this very significant conversation, and he came back and he was just so on fire about how rich her life was and all this stuff. He was so compelled by her story that he started kind of thinking it was a story in itself. And so that's kind of like the genesis of the project. Was then came the courtship piece, because then he had to court her in order to get her to give him permission to tell the story. And it's a big deal telling someone's story, and he was very humbled by it, and very we also knew that he would have to win her over. So there was a whole courtship situation, connecting about music, and then Jamie diving into literally immersing himself in Amy's life through her books on audio, every moment of the day, headphones and his computer, or every time he jumped into his car, you would just be launched into a novel of Amy's. We became like the Amy Tan household for a while.
Oh my
Well,
God.
I think it sounds like
yeah.
I was just going to say, it sounds like what many people have experienced, which is the obsession of Amy Tan. That is all I want to say. And you go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Oh, I just said, I never knew this until recently, how much he had my life on, in so prominently in his life. And, the thing about Jamie wanting me to do this documentary, it had nothing to do with not wanting to do it with Jamie. It was not wanting to do something at all like that, because I wanted to retreat a little bit more to a private life. I called it my path to obscurity, and Jamie's proposal was, counter to that.
Sure.
And I told him that. So it was, something that I really had to think about. And it was really Jamie's charm, and as well as my complete trust in him, that enabled me to do this. The other thing was, I told Jamie, I'm not that famous. American Masters, that's like for famous people. And, so that was part of it too. I didn't want to go out and have people think, well, I think I'm an American master. So that was,
well, I think there are a lot of people
course.
who are watching right now who are, shaking their heads in disbelief at that concept, that you could question that after the number of years of success you've had. But it shows a very human side of you. So thanks for sharing that. Let's get to the film and watch a clip of it. We've got about 20 minutes. It's a trailer that's been put together with different elements of the film throughout. Why don't you tell us about this process of making this documentary, or let's even start before that, writing this book. What's different about this book than the various stories you've told at different times along the way?
I was so delayed in writing a book, I decided I had to give myself some enforced discipline. And I said to my editor, I need to be on a schedule and turn in a chapter on a regular basis. And he thought that was great. And he said, like every 2-3 weeks. And I said, no, every week. And that's something I've never done before. And what it did, it was forcing me to just come out with things that were unedited in a way in my life, and writing about things I'd never written about. So it was pretty raw, and there were a lot of discoveries about, say, my father. I had a pile of documents, and in front of me, all this stuff that had been saved by my parents, and finding out, for example, that they were illegal at one time. Finding out about all kinds of secrets, and thinking about how that affected our lives, not knowing where some of these actions came from, which I think that a lot of that is in the documentary, as well as it going beyond, an intimate conversation that continues with what happened, what I found in the book.
One of the pieces of the documentary that really spoke to me, and you say this early on, is that you've been filled with a neediness to know, not just a need to know. Could you tell us about the difference between those?
Well, a need to know often refers to something that is finite. Like, you need to know how to get to some place. You need to know, how much something's going to cost. Neediness to know is a constant state of inquiry, so that with everything, whether it's religion or whether it's why you write, or, who is your mother, that is a constant thing, and it's never satisfied. It's not out of frustration. It's the need to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think that came from my mother, who always needed to know something. She was never satisfied with a straight answer. She needed to feel more. It used to really irritate me that she did that. And now I realize she gave me this gift of the gift of a writer, which is to observe and constantly question what is going on, how I react to it, what people are doing, and the conditions of the world.
Hmm. And how are you finding that these days in this last year of pandemic? What was your life like?
I've had a lot more just neediness to know because of the number of friends that I've lost. I've lost 5 friends and a family member, and some really, really close friends like Jamie. And for a while, I hope this doesn't happen. I couldn't talk about Jamie without crying, but I have. So I started to think about the nature of people in our lives and what do we mean by loss, as well as my own mortality, and thinking, well, what do I have to do? And I'm not talking about now I need to go climb Kilimanjaro. It's more, what do I have to investigate in my life? What is important, but also equally what's not important? You know, uh, do I need new furniture? And then you think, well, I've got all this stuff. I don't need a 20-year guarantee for anything. I have some new furniture here because it was free. It was given to me. But otherwise, I don't need things in my life. If anything, I'm giving things away. And that's what happens when you get older and you have a pandemic going on, knowing that you could die, within a matter of days or weeks. Um, I think it's really good to think about mortality for a writer, not with fear. I don't have a fear about it. My fear has more to do with what haven't I had time to look at, and who's going to look in my underwear drawer, when I'm gone. Don't have, not able to censor that. That's if I died suddenly, and then somebody had to go through these things, these embarrassing things. So I've also started, culling. And it's just with that thought of mortality, but also, who matters and why, and what we mean by loss.
And your work so often seems to touch on what we've lost and where we move forward from that loss. Amy, when you went through this process of synthesizing these different parts of your life and seeing them laid out in the film, what did you learn from doing that? And what was the emotional impact of watching the film once it was finished?
I think that what Jamie did was, created a narrative, and he followed that narrative in a way that made me see just much more concretely all of the things, especially trauma, that made me a writer. I would, part of it is you have to talk this out and get this out of you. I also just looked at my background, my family, my brother, as all of these people being such a support to me. And they all spoke so honestly about what had happened. I was really relieved, because I tell people a certain thing about my life, and they could have interviewed Lou or my brother or my best friend, and they could have come up with something completely different. They did say things that surprised me. It was completely true.
Anything that stands out to you right now?
Yeah, that Jamie shouldn't have shown me smoking cigarettes.
It did make me wonder if you smoke now.
I know. No. I quit, 1991 or something, before I was 40. No, I quit, and I just looked at that and I thought, oh my God. And then I saw these bad fashions, and all these glasses. It's just the funny thing that only a person in that would notice, watching that, and say, oh, the piano. That was the other thing. Jamie used a couple of things of me playing the piano. And here's something I discovered watching what that was, why he chose it. I wouldn't have chosen it. I wouldn't have seen how proud my mother was. I mean, the look on her face, just grinning, like, look, she's a concert pianist. I mean, I was so bad. I failed her to become, not becoming a concert pianist, but oh my God, she was so proud in that. And it just touched my heart to see that. He did sequences like, putting together the interviews that were done, the articles, that were out there. I had a big box, and I was going to throw them away. And I called Jamie up, and I said, I had this stuff, and it's just a bunch of junk. It's like 3 bins of newspaper and magazines that I had collected the first few years. And I said, do you want it? And he said, yeah. Do you want these VHS tapes? He said, yeah. And the VHS tapes, I couldn't see, but he had them digitized. And I was just so grateful for, somebody has told the story of your life in such a loving and honest way. He included things that I wouldn't have wanted the public to see. And I'm glad he put that in there, because it's me. That's a thing, it's not the glossy, all the accomplishments people give you when they're introducing you. It's the complexity that makes me who I am.
And in addition to those VHS tapes, the home movies, the articles, the various TV appearances that you've done over time, he also incorporated this new beautiful artwork. Kyle, could you tell us a little bit about that and the process of creating these gorgeous flowing black and white images, sometimes with accents of red, why he chose to bring that in and how that was created?
Well, Jamie has always been a fan of using animation when and if he can in documentary filmmaking. There's a whole kind of poetic component to that, the introduction of animation. And I think because documentary filmmaking, he's never been a big fan of reenactment, but he also wants to capture, he doesn't want to just go from one talking head to another talking head, so there's some like storytelling that needs to be done. And he was really compelled by animation to do that level of storytelling. To the abstraction works for him. It actually you can tell the story and then some. And so I think that his attraction to animation was that it gave a level of kind of poetry and beauty and another level to the storytelling that you can't get. There's some limitations around documentary filmmaking that I think he didn't think completely was solved with animation, but kind of like got all the way almost there, and then added something that other things couldn't add. So yeah, and this documentary, this animator was so amazing, and they had to work remotely, and I think just did an extraordinary job. And
the animation really adds a very lyrical and evocative quality to this film. We have several questions that are coming in now from the audience. And Amy, several of them focus on your necklace. And I wanted to ask you about this as well, because I've noticed that you wear it very regularly. Can you tell us about your necklace and significance? Was it made specially?
I took my mother to Japan on one of my book tours. She met a man 2 weeks before we were about to leave. It was a friend's father, Gus Lee, who's also a writer. And this older man was also Shanghainese, and they fell in love. And I said, oh, too bad that, there's no time to get him, to go. And my mother said, not too late. And so she took her lover with her, and we had to tell my uncle that they were married. Surprise, Anyway, he, as a thank you, Gus Lee's father, who became my father-in-law, or not father, stepfather, bought this for me. And it's a locket, and it says on one side in characters, all that you wish. It's a typical saying in Chinese. And then I found this thing in New York, a store just down the street from where I am that's closed since it's Indian. And I put them together.
And why do you
it
wear
is
them?
my favorite. It's my favorite necklace, but it's also because it reminds me of that time that we were in China. And the meaning of that saying is, it's not all that you wish that it is in terms of material goods or, wealth. It really is a reminder of all the things you wish to have in your life that is important, and to think about those and to remember them all the time. So it's my talisman.
Mhm. Amy, there's been a lot of attention paid lately to the rise in anti-Asian American violence and hate crimes. Have you seen this sort of, the underbelly, this sort of hate over the years coming out? Has it surprised you how it's shown up in this past year?
I've experienced it since I was a little girl, and I remember wondering what these insults meant, and finding out I was different, finding out I was Chinese. That was back in the 50s, and we've gone through periods where it's manifested in different ways, this racism, and it changed. It changed over the last 4 years of the last administration, profoundly. That there was the hatred was expressed in vile ways. I've gotten a lot of it. I mean, if I were to go to certain websites and look at it, I'll have thousands of them on there, actually, in just one post. I'll do a post and you can see all this vile stuff, and it includes a typical comment, which is go back to where you came from. And I don't answer it, but I would say, oh, you mean to Oakland, California? That's where I came from. Or they say, you brought COVID here. Those are very typical sentiments said to me. The intensity of that is disturbing. And I know, I'm just one person. It happens to many people.
Do you have any particular words for aspiring, let's say, Asian American writers, but then more broadly to those who are hoping to follow in your footsteps?
I am so encouraged by the number of people, Asian AAPI people who are writing and getting published these days. I mean, to write is one thing, but to get published, it also means that there are writers and there are publishers. You have to give credit to people, editors who are willing to take the risk or see the value of stories that are different. And certainly when you have voices of a different culture or different religion, you will get a different kind of story, a different perspective, but also a universal story. If it's told well, if it's told with emotion and it's authentic, you will get a universal story that moves people, makes them empathetic and compassionate, which is so important these days. You get somebody to be moved in emotion, you can change them. You can change their attitude, their desire to understand. And these stories can be very different. They don't have to be about mothers and daughters and family. They have, like The Sympathizer or Celeste Ng's book, kind of a mystery in a family, or you can have so many different voices. So I'm very, very encouraged by that. I also want to call attention to the fact that we get lumped into AAPI, as you know, and that's good. I think it's a strength, a unity that we have that began, I believe, back in the 70s, the late 70s, and has really done something really wonderful in unifying us for especially issues like racism. But we also have to keep in mind that we are not homogenous. Asians include a whole huge spectrum of people with a lot of common experiences, but also very different ones, different circumstances. And so we show support for one another, for our API fellow writers, and then we also acknowledge and celebrate the differences.
I'd like to read a comment here that's come in from Belinda Robinson. She writes, "My relationship with my mother was so complex. To understand that relationship, I would love to write my understanding, hoping it would give me a handle on the complex relationship with my own daughter, but I can't or don't write well enough. And so for those who are out there who'd like to, use the same tools that you have, but feel like they don't have the skill, what would you say to those folks?
I first of all think that it's important to know your reasons for writing. If your reason is to publish, you might have some disappointment. There are a lot of people who write and few people who get published in a big way. But it's valuable for, I think, anybody to write, to understand themselves, to understand their family, to honor their family, to move forward their lives with deeper understanding. And I will say, not simply to plug the class that I just taught. A lot of the principles of the writing and what I think people can do as beginning writers is in a master class that I did. And it focuses very much on emotional memories and how that influences our memory and imagination and the kind of story that we're going to tell. It's a good way to just go in there and say, yes, I have a lot of material. I have the materials, the source material to be a writer. And that's what I think that people need to begin with, as opposed to saying, I don't know the beautiful words, I can't craft the beautiful. That'll come. We all revise. I revise 100 times per page. But you have to know deeply the story that you feel. And that is the most important thing.
You address this next concern that I'm about to read from a viewer in your film. Chantel Gundry writes, how do you deal with public expectations for new work after you move on from completed books?
Yes, that never goes away. I didn't have expectations with the first book, or very few expectations. I wanted to please the editor, and my outhouse editor, I call it, who saw the real poop, and Molly Giles, who's in the film. But I wanted them to be happy with what I'd done craft-wise and the stories. But then I was published, and to success that I'd never expected. And so the next book made me so nervous. I couldn't figure out what people liked about the first book, and I was trying to figure it out. And I cracked 3 teeth, from the stress of doing that. Every single book gets harder because it's not just the expectations of readers and publishers and all the people, the critics out there who are on guard for if you're doing too much of the same thing, or you should go back to doing the same thing. I had to tune all that out. But the worst thing is my own expectations. I always have to, I feel I have to get better. The expectations just kind of kill me. And I'd like to go that when I said that I want to go back to obscurity, a lot of it has to do with having that privacy to write without the feeling I have any expectations from the public.
In the documentary, we get to see this beautiful artwork that you're doing these days, or at least recently, where you're drawing birds. And for those of you who don't know, Amy Tan is not only an amazing and accomplished writer, she is also an artist. She also sings in a rock band. She's also a pianist. She's also a wife and daughter and sister. So tell us about your artwork these days. Is that a big part of it still occupying your time?
It does. It's become a big passion of mine. It started about 4 years ago when I had to find beauty again in the world. And I had always loved to draw when I was a kid, but I gave up in part because a teacher had said that I had admirable skills, I could render something nicely, but that I lacked imagination. Imagine being told you lack imagination. So necessary to go to a deeper creative level, that kind of sticks with you. So I didn't really draw that much, every now and then a little doodle. But then I started wanting to get into nature. In nature, you find beauty everywhere, astonishment in every little detail. And I decided that I was going to observe, which is what I do in life with people. You observe and you see these behaviors, and you have to understand why and what it is for them to survive. Then I started drawing very detailed drawings with colored pencil, like line by line, these feathers, these little, and it was a meditation for me because I could appreciate them. I would imagine myself as that bird and what it was feeling, looking at me, you know, the stranger, and like the wariness, and at what point could the, you know, I be trusted. So that became part of my life. I look at birds. I have my computer set up, and right beyond the computer is my patio where I've seen 51 species of birds. And every day not 51 every day, but I'll see, you know, 15 to 20 of these, and I'll pick one and just sit down and draw for hours. And it's so pleasurable. Now, the thing is, those are for me. I will post them on the Nature Journal Club page on Facebook, but I don't always post just the perfect ones there because they're not perfect, and I have perfection syndrome I need to get over. I post the bad ones, or what I think are bad. I force myself to do that because the important thing about these birds and the observations about nature is the observation, not about the drawing. So that has brought an incredible amount of joy in my life. That is, I would say, it's a complement to writing. The two activities are so much about, you know, compassion, because you have to pretend, or I have to pretend I'm the bird as I'm drawing it. I have to observe every detail. I have to understand what the behavior is, why it's there, and if it changes over time. All of the skills that I use for writing fiction.
That perfectionistic tendency that you mentioned, there's been such an output of creativity from you. Did you find it held you back in some ways? Do you find it still whispers in your ear and holds you back?
You know, the way that it is especially held me back was with music. I had a piano recital when I was 6 years old. I started learning how to play music when I was 5, which astonishes me now because it means I had to learn to read music at an age when a lot of kids don't read in general. Well, they do now, you know, if they have ambitious parents. But I played a song, a little Bach prelude, at a recital, and I memorized it, only I got stuck because of the fingering. I made a mistake. That was so traumatic to me that to this day, I will not play in front of people unless I'm really forced. So those few times, you know, Jamie selected the videos of me playing. There's another scene that he does that, and I botch it up the same way that I did, you know, and I kind of am embarrassed and try to get over it. But I have a really hard time doing that, which is why I also agreed to be in this rock band. I am not a singer by any means. Part of it was to learn that it's enjoyable and it reaches into a different part of you that no other endeavor can touch. One of the things I love about this documentary is the composer that Jamie chose, Catherine Bostic. And she and I have had conversations. We're going to get together and we're going to do music together in the future. She'll come and stay with me. But I still want to compose. I want to compose my own theme. And I don't need to do full orchestration. I can do a theme and work variations off of that. And it'll just be for me. But that is to satisfy this part of me that loves music so much. And the perfection syndrome, it affects everything in my life, like my pandemic hair. No, I mean, that's not serious. It affects my desire, it affects my skiing, it affects everything, you know. And I sit back and I say, oh, this person is better than I am, and I shouldn't do that. You know, I can give that advice to other people, but I have the same problems. So something that I believe a lot of people struggle with. And one of the things I don't have to struggle with, which would be huge, is how to be a perfect parent. and I would fail a lot. If you think of it in terms of failure, I would have failed a lot. But it's just being the mother to a child and all the things that come up, and yeah.
And you talk in the film about your decision to not be a parent. How do you feel about that decision
Yeah.
at this point in your life?
Well, I've never regretted it, but I will say my husband and I chose not to have kids, but we did not choose to not have grandkids. And that's the difference. Grandkids are incredible. You get to give them the best of things. You don't have to worry about all the hospital visits or anything like that. Well, you do, but all the other things that go with it. And it's great. So what I've done is I have kids in my life. My neighbor's kids, Gio and Lily. Gio and I read together. I pick up books for him. The March by John Lewis, and I get to do the things you would want to do with a grandchild. I have another one I saw yesterday, went through the park, and he grabs my legs and hugs me and says he missed me. It's been 2 years and I just can't believe he remembers. But we just talk about, we're going to go to the little house together, So I get that. And I know that it's not the same. I do know from having worked with kids for 5 years, developmentally disabled children, both to 5, that the love you have for a child is the greatest love you could ever experience, you could ever give. I think that's true. And it goes beyond the love you have for your spouse.
We're going to have to wrap up, unfortunately, but I do want to give you an opportunity here at the end to reflect a bit more broadly. I meant it at the beginning when I called you a sage. I think you obviously have gained a lot of wisdom over the years. And I'm curious what you would like to leave us with. What advice from your own life that you'd say, you think that could really help people?
Well, a lot of what the film is about has to do with memory and making connections, what you know about your life, but people in the people at the very early stages of your life and how that's continued, that there is a pattern. There are patterns. There are diversions. There are different distractions, but there is a pattern in your life, and to recognize it helps you to understand who you are. I think we are lonely people when we feel that no one understands us. No one will ever understand us completely. But when you write, you come so much closer to that, or when you remember, or when you talk about these things and record them, I think you'll have a better chance of seeing the patterns and how far you've come. And you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be, totally have these total realizations. You end up seeing it and you love yourself for that. You love what you've gone through. You love yourself for everything and what you understand. That's what I think, to understand who you've become and how wonderful that is that you're in the world with these other people.
Thank you. We want to say thank you to our guests, Amy Tan. Thank you for being with us. And Kyle Redford, the wife of the filmmaker of this documentary. Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah.
And thank you so much to our partners at the San Francisco Public Library also. Be sure to tune into the premiere of Amy Tan, Unintended Memoir from American Masters on KQED 9 tomorrow at 9 p.m. Pacific, or stream it online with PBS Passport. And if that doesn't satisfy your interest in Amy Tan's story and creative inspirations, there are more than a dozen books and collections to choose from, including most recently, Where the Past Begins, a writer's memoir. You can find these and more at amytan.net. You can also check out her lessons on fiction, memory, and imagination from Masterclass, which is new and very much worth the time. Join KQED for our next events, a fresh spring cooking masterclass with celebrated chef Martin Yan on Thursday, May 6th, a screening of the PBS documentary Asian Americans featuring conversation with producer Grace Lee on May 26th, and an evening of Bay Area dance and film at the Fort Mason Drive-In on Thursday, June 3rd. More information about this and other KQED events can be found at kqed.org/events. Thanks so much. It's been lovely seeing you all.